I'm not going to understand their specific trauma or their specific lifestyles. I'm not going to say I don't bother. I just try to use my imagination to the best of my ability. From there, it's like my clients' problems I can be affected by, but I can't take on. If I did that, I'd be compromised as a counselor and I'd lose my mind and I'd be out of this profession in a week. So being able to have that, hey, I can be affected, I can even cry in session with the person, but at the end of the day, this isn't my problem and this isn't my story.
Welcome to the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. This episode is sponsored by the Collab Oasis Clinical Consultation Groups. Hi, I'm Janine Wolf, and I'm your colleague down the hall. I have a passion for helping fellow therapists get the clinical and collegial support we all need to do this work. And wow, it just keeps getting harder every day. I'm the founder and facilitator of the Collab Oasis Clinical Consultation Groups. I have been a social worker for almost 30 years, and I own a successful solo online private practice. More of us than ever are practicing in solo or online practices, and we all need colleagues to process cases with, commiserate with on those really hard days, and also to celebrate our successes with. In this podcast, I'll bring you insights about trends and changes in our field and sit down with amazing therapists who are doing amazing work. We'll discuss fictionalized cases, ways to practice sustainably, and of course, there will be plenty of laughing. I love laughing with friends. I'm so glad to have you as one of my colleagues down the hall. Hello, everyone. You are listening to another episode of the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. I'm your host, Janine Wolf, joined by a group of colleagues I met at a summit in Costa Rica. So let's take a moment for some introductions. Can each of you share your name, where you're from, and a little bit about your client work?
So my name is Jennifer Lively Payuka. I am in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I work on Nellis Air Force Base as a DV and intimate partner and child abuse treatment manager.
My name is Angela Franklin, and I'm an LMHC. I work in Florida, and I don't have a big caseload, so not currently accepting new patients, but I have a team that I work with.
My name is Emily Ann Bihar. I'm a clinical professional counselor intern, and I also specialize in alcohol and drugs, addiction, trauma, and I love adolescents. I have a billion jobs, it feels like. Private practice, I work at an agency, and I work at an IOP for adults that struggle with substance use and mental health. Oh, Las Vegas.
Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Malora, licensed mental health counselor, licensed professional counselor. Originally from Pittsburgh, but currently traveling all over. I serve clients in PA, New York, and Florida, and I specialize in fear and self-sabotage, men's issues, veterans issues, sexual health, and courage building.
Awesome. What a diverse group we have here. All right. So today we're going to talk about having uncomfortable conversations with colleagues in a respectful way. And so let's sort of set the scene about how this group of 5 of us came together and wanted to share an experience that we had in February. A group of us went to a summit in Costa Rica. And some of us met during the summit. Some of us met for the first time at the airport. But we were all traveling home on the same day, around the same time. And we ended up just sort of seeing other therapists, and we were kind of gathering people because we needed food, and it was kind of crowded there. So we were looking for a space where we could just sit down and get some food and chat with other therapists, because, therapists like to hang out with each other. People don't really get that, but therapists are pretty cool to hang out with. So we found this restaurant/bar, and we ended up sitting there, and at some point, I'm not quite sure how it happened, but our getting to know you type conversation started veering towards topics that tend to feel uncomfortable to have with people you don't know very well. It may have stemmed from the training that some of us had been in the day before about anti-racism with Jen Wen-So, which was really powerful and so helpful and informative. And if you have any opportunities to learn from her, I would highly recommend her. So I'm just going to kind of open this up. This is sort of an experiential experiment in that we are just people who happen to have this conversation, acknowledged at the time that it was happening, that it was kind of cool that it was happening. And so I just want to to ask everyone, like, do you have any thoughts that stood out about what we were doing in the middle, like while the conversation was happening? Because we talked about gun control, we talked about race, we talked about, well, I'm not going to go through the whole list. We'll kind of get with that as we go. So did anyone have any thoughts that stood out as they were occurring?
I know for me, it was that people were being open and just like able to discuss thoughts that were on their mind and kind of reflecting on past experiences that came forward from being together and the summit.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
I would agree. I was thinking like, wow, this is what mature adult conversations actually look like in real life. We talk about it all the time in our sessions and how to do them, but to actually see it play out was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, what really stood out for me is during our undergrad or even in grad school, we learn about multicultural competence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that that's more of like looking through a wider lens and learning. For some reason, I think that the connecting how learning about culture and learning about race, and we all sat there and we all kind of felt similar. That was interesting to me because we all felt the same way about a certain topic. We all had somatic responses. I almost was like, whoa, how are we not prepared to like feel like, how are we feeling this? How are we all feeling it at the same time? So that was really interesting. That was a interesting experience.
Yeah. Emily, I have to say at one point you were like, whoo, it's feeling really hot in here. I'm feeling really hot. And I so appreciated you kind of calling that out because for one thing, it was kind of like a little comedic break for a laugh, but I think we were all feeling that way. And it was a chance for us all to recognize like, all right, we are all different people, different races, probably different religions, maybe different sexualities. I don't know all that information about you, but we were not by any means a homogenous group. And so to be able to say like, okay, yeah, we're all feeling really hot and uncomfortable right now, but we also really appreciate that it's, we're being respectful. We're listening to each other. We're taking turns talking. That really stood out for me. Okay. So what are the thoughts that people, has any of this, like, I know that this stuck with me and I told so many people about it, and it's something that I would love to find a way to replicate on a regular basis. And maybe even the podcast is a way that we can do that. But is there anything that had really stood out to you as far as like, wow, this is a takeaway that I want to make sure that I don't forget?
From the conversation that we had at the airport or from the training?
Yeah.
I think when Emily actually called out like, oh my gosh, I'm getting really warm, and like calling out that feeling and that emotion, I think allowed us to like really think about, oh, wow, I'm really feeling some way too. Like, and being able to talk and openly discuss like, hey, we're having a very heated conversation that is very respectful, but we're also feeling some sort of way, I think helped in regards to being able to communicate more effectively with one another and have that respect for one another.
I would have to say the same thing as well. I know that when Emily and I were talking about, with race and things that have happened in the past with her client, that sparked some thoughts in me as far as, I, as an African-American, I'm Latina, so Latina, African-American, I still don't know what my dad goes through or has been through, not fully, right? Or what my nephew has gone through, or, just thinking about the different experiences that people have had with race, and not only African-American, because it can happen in any, Caucasian, Filipino, different experiences. So just not fully knowing and knowing that there's more voices to listen to and for people that we can help, just widening my eyes and my horizons, if you will, to be able to help in the future.
I agree. And one of the areas that I'm seeing a lot of the therapists in my consultation groups discuss is, as our world is changing, not only do we need to be examining our own values in a changing world and how they might show up in the room, but, we are taught to be a blank slate. And there was a time that you could be a blank slate, but it's not this time anymore. And we are not giving any guidance around having a client sitting in front of us who is saying something offensive to who we are as a person, our race, our religion, or whatever, and sitting in the room with this person. In the past, the expectation for my generation of therapists, the expectation would be like, you just push down your own thoughts and deal with this. And we're not given the guidance that, oh, hell no, we can refer this client out. Like, we don't have to work with this person who clearly can tell. Sometimes they can't, but sometimes they can very much tell that they are talking offensively about something that represents us as a person, and they're doing it anyway. And we don't have to tolerate that.
That's interesting. I didn't even think of it that way. I was thinking more like, when I was thinking about like race and culture, when I was a practicum student, I had a Hispanic couple, and the husband would tell me, I want you to tell her what to do, like kind of direct to me to direct to her, because and it was just interesting. I staffed the case, with my supervisors, and we talked about how like culture can play a role and how to be open-minded. And somebody gave me really, really good advice. It was a primary that I had. It's not the same case, but the gist of it was, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what culture you come from. When somebody's hitting someone, there's consequences, at least here. So right. It kind of, there's so much gray there. There's so many things to consider, right? Because maybe you'll have somebody who does hear you in a different way or see you in a different way. But how do you get them to hear what you're saying? Or how do you get them to understand the message that you're trying to convey, so that they can change what they want to change?
Right.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm like trying to follow myself. I'm like, does that make any sense?
It does.
Yeah, absolutely.
In regards to offense, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Steve.
In regards to offense, I think I am pretty okay with it due to various, there are limits, of course. There are certain things where the line is drawn. It's like, nah, you're going to have to see someone else, especially if it's something super reprehensible. But I think me, I'm probably a little bit different than you guys in regards to what offends me. So I want to put this, when someone comes to me with a belief or an opinion or an expression that really makes me angry, first, I got to look at myself and find out why. And second, I'm kind of in a very good place because I've heard it before from all my colleagues. So the entire idea of I want to put this, finding out why. Okay, what is this belief actually coming from, and how have you used this to survive in the past? Because that's one of the things I always go back to. Is this like a trauma response? Because usually it is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And being able to start from there and being able to say, hey, this is something that I'm having an emotional reaction to, but it's probably something that they have used to, keep themselves safe in a weird situation, has been really helpful. Well, letting me work with people who wouldn't be my ideal client.
Yeah, that's a really great point.
Weirdly, if they piss me off, usually in 3 months, they are my ideal client.
I love that so much. Yeah, but also, if we can tolerate whatever is going on in the room, is that an opportunity, like you were saying, for us to maybe enlighten them or help them grow or help them see a different side? And depending on the type of client you're working with and the type of therapy you do, it may or may not be appropriate, but there certainly is space for that in the therapy room.
I was thinking the same thing, because I remember that from class, to make sure to check myself. And so always check yourself. But I did think the same thing when Stephen said that, okay, step back and think about how that term or that phrase serves that person, has been serving them. And to me, that's like a link between if somebody's using substances or if somebody's doing a certain behavior. So I never thought of it that way. So I think it's really useful, because it's sometimes easy to shut down and be like, I didn't like what this person just said, or, but I do think that it'll allow not only, the relationship to grow, but as a therapist and that person, because you might be able to shift their thinking.
Yeah.
Steve, as you were talking, the thing that came to mind for me was modeling. I talk about this with my kiddos and with my families, is that we want to model the behavior for our kiddos to grow up and do, right? So if our parents are fighting all the time in DV situations, how can we model to them, to the kiddos, so they don't grow up and engage in those behaviors when they get older, or engage in those type of relationships when they get older? And as therapists, as we take that internal look, we really have to be careful, because we also need to model behavior so our adult patients can see, so they can model to their kiddos or to their siblings or to whoever's in their life that they're trying to change. How do they model that, and how can they see that? We as a therapist are able to do that as well, and modeling that, hey, this made me feel uncomfortable, and having that hard conversation. You talking this way makes me feel uncomfortable in our sessions, and I want to see you grow, and I want to see you do these things and get better like you asked to, and help you on your goals. But this is a barrier for me. So how can we move past this? And I think, Steve, you got it right on the money in regards to, like, we have to take that internal look at ourselves, and why is this pissing us off? Why is this making us upset? Why is this triggering us? And how do we model that for our clients?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, kind of going back to that, there's two things I want to connect. I want to connect, like, during the training when we had to do that exercise, and we heard a lot of the things that people believed growing up about certain races, right? Like, we heard it wasn't ill-intended. It was just the way that it was for some people. But I mean, if I were to be completely honest, just even hearing it was creating tension, right? Creating this, like,
Yes.
whoa, like, oh my God, is anybody else uncomfortable? Like, I wanted to just like, scream that out loud.
Jen did a good job of making us all uncomfortable, didn't she?
I don't know how she's running it. It was amazing.
Yeah.
But, kind of going back to that, and like all of that energy from all of us, and then having that on a smaller scale in a session, right? Kind of like going back to my guy that educated me a little bit about being in the movement. So for me, that was grounding, because I felt everything. When he shared his story, I felt it. I could visualize it. And that was really powerful. So I'm curious, what do you all think about the difference in scaling, feeling it on a bigger scale, and then feeling it in a session? How do we take that opportunity? I mean, I don't even know if I did the right thing, right? Because I think at one point I probably stopped being clinical, because I was just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
oh my
you were
gosh.
being a human. We are humans.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like, what are your thoughts on that? I just kind of, those two things.
You know me, I'm pretty heartless. So I'm like, okay, your feelings are gross. Go away.
Yeah, we're not buying that. But you can have that mask up if you want, but we're not buying it.
No. But I will say this: the concept is like, okay, I'm not going to understand their specific trauma or their specific lifestyles. I'm not going to say I don't bother. I just try to use my imagination to the best of my ability. From there, it's like, my clients' problems I can be affected by, but I can't take on. If I did that, I'd be compromised as a counselor, and I'd lose my mind, and I'd be out of this profession in a week. Mm-hmm. So being able to have that, hey, I can be affected. I can even cry in session with the person. But at the end of the day, this isn't my problem, and this isn't my story. At best, I get to just influence and help out with my expertise as a person who knows how the mind works and how relationships work. So having that very clear, I don't want to say boundary, I want to say limit of like, this is where I'm at, and this is as far as I'm willing to go, and that, like, take a step back. That's what helps me get through that.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's no way we can really prepare for any and everything that might come into the room. I think we probably all had experiences where a client came in and you're just like, I never expected that to come out of your mouth. And I've had learned a really good poker face. Like literally you can say anything in front of me and I'm not going to respond. My inside, I might be going, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. But I'm going to like keep my act together and process that. And sometimes it helps us identify areas where we need to take a harder look at ourselves. But we also have such a huge opportunity as therapists to learn from our clients and to grow from our clients. That is such a gift in our field. It's hard work, but you also get these gifts of hearing people's stories at times and understanding something that you not related to and you never would have understood before.
And then seeing them grow from it and survive and thrive.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. And I know, Emily, you said these are my words, but you stepped out of being a therapist, but being human. And I know I've heard some clients say in the past, like just seeing you tear up from when I was telling you my experience is something that helped with that person opening up more or the connection. So yeah, I agree. I do cry too with, I want to call them patients, but clients.
Yeah.
And sometimes I cry too. Oh, go ahead.
Well, and the other thing is we set the bar so high for ourselves as therapists that we feel like we have to do everything right in the moment. And hopefully over time, people have learned that, okay, so I'm going to have a session where I leave it and I'm like, well, that didn't go very well. But we have that opportunity at the next session to say, let's talk about what happened last time. And honestly, I've had clients that came back the next time. They're like, last session was amazing. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because we know what we want or should be doing, but they don't necessarily know that. But we always have that opportunity to recover and say, I'd like to talk about that some more. I'd like to learn more, or I've looked into this more and I'd like to have this discussion more if it would benefit the client, obviously.
Right.
Yeah. And once again, we have to be human first. So I don't have a poker face at all. If anyone sees me, they know exactly what I'm feeling. And I've had sessions where both myself and my client have ended it being very, very, very angry at each other. And then coming back in a week and basically modeling that, hey, either nonviolent communication or this is what a resolution is.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're allowed to I don't want to say it's our work because it's not, but it's still 50% of our relationship. We control 50% of this relationship. And the idea is it's not going to be sunshines and rainbows. We're doing psychic surgery here. We're getting messy.
Mm-hmm.
I like that, psychic surgery.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want that on a shirt.
Let's add it to the merch store. We'll make it happen.
Okay, so this episode's probably going to come out a little bit after when we're doing this recording. But during the week of this recording, we've had another school shooting in Nashville. So let's share our thoughts about that. Does anyone have thoughts they want to share, either from a helpful perspective for potential clients listening or for practitioners, or just your own thoughts?
Human society is sick. This entire idea of I have two directions. One, danger is, actually I talked to one of my friends yesterday about this. As a veteran, as a guy, there's this idea that I run into with my colleagues all the time, and it seems like an aspirational one. If we just get rid of the guns, if we just get rid of evil from the human heart, it's going to solve all of our problems. And guys, quick Professor Steve mode about logical and natural consequences. Natural consequences, if you go outside without a coat, you might get cold. That's a natural consequence. If you say, Steve, you're ugly and stupid, and I punch you, that's a logical consequence. That's me actually doing an artificial action. I think for a lot of ways, the people in this profession view acts like this as logical actions, when I view evil as almost a natural force. So when I think about the Nashville shooting or any other shooting, it's like, okay, there's no actual way to fight this. Well, there's several ways to fight this. There's a logistical, hey, let's make sure someone like me is empowered enough. If there's a school shooting, I want to run towards the gunfire. And B, it's like, okay, there's just so much hurt, anger, malice. Yes. And that is a direction that I find a lot of people in this profession just don't want to go to.
Mm-hmm.
I know for me, like, it makes me really scared as a mother. I'm scared. I'm sad for these families, worried about my own kids. I want to pull my kids out and homeschool them and shelter them so they never have to experience this. But on the other side of that coin is I want to help people and I want these to stop. How do we do that? And that's where should I go back to school and learn how to help with like passing bills? And should I learn how to do this or do that so we can have, proper gun reform or proper whatever to help these families and these individuals who are suffering, who are so angry and taking it out on people with guns, in mass shootings? How can we help them so this stops? So I have like two parts of my brain going back and forth.
Yeah. And so both you and Steve, I think, are more of you veterans? Angela's a veteran. Okay. So you're all
spouse.
You're all veterans. Spouse. Okay. So it's a spouse of a veteran and then 3 veterans. And then I live in a huge military town. So yeah. So it's interesting because I know all of those things shape our thoughts as well, and our own personal rights and what we want for ourselves and our families, but then also what is the greater good of society, which there is no answer to any of that. I mean, I'm sure there are some answers, but not that easy answers that people are all going to agree upon, except that we all want it to end.
Right. And I think that's so controversial about it. And I get this. I totally get this. Generalizing it, we are scared of what we don't know, right? We don't know about it. It's scary. That's a very valid thing. It's interesting, Jen, when you were talking, for me, the minute this happened, my sister-in-law, she's at LCSW in Florida, married to a firefighter. My husband's a firefighter, and it's weird. Mm-hmm. We didn't plan it. She posted it. That's how I found out about it. And I was instantly, my brain was just like, all of these things are firing off. And I'm like, okay, Route 90, like I'm thinking of all these shootings, and I go for like the root. I'm thinking like, how can we get to the root? It's knowledge, right? It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like what need is not being met. We can't go to every door and knock on it and say, here, this is why you should or should be pro or anti-gun. That's, I don't want that job. I want the job of like, what is going on with this little kiddo? Like what is it? Because at the end of the day, unless there's like a real, chime in here, please, for the fully licensed people, unless like a real, like, I guess I'm trying to say like a mental health disorder, like a real other than, there's usually biological, environmental, social, psychological factors that play a part of how we end up behaving, our schemas, our belief systems. So for me, it's a perfect example. I have a colleague, she works for an agency here that sees DFS kids, and they're rough. They're rough. It doesn't matter if 17, 16, 15, they're selling drugs and they're owning guns. It does not matter. They'll get them. They'll find them. They'll use them. So how do we help? How, they're already there. How can we even get to them before they're using? Or before they're using the guns, or before they're into these games? Like, how can we intervene even before then? So that's kind of where my brain goes. I don't know. Maybe it's a fantasy. Yeah. I try to think that it isn't a fantasy, but that's where I go with these things. Because it's sad. It's very tragic. It's very sad.
Yeah.
It's sad. It's scary. It can happen anywhere. I remember when 9/11 happened, and I'm thinking, and I wasn't the only one, right? That this is going to happen again in some other way. But listening to the comments, I'm going to go backwards. So, and I just pictured like going into schools and trying to get education with the students that way, right? I don't know much about being a therapist in a school. I know I interviewed one years ago, and a lot of it was based, in Florida, IEP, I hope I said that right, programs, a lot of admin stuff. And then I know I've heard teens say before that the therapist wasn't able to be available to them. Maybe going that route and allowing therapists in schools to be more with the students. Again, I've never worked in a school, so I don't know. I've just heard gist of it, but I just picture a bunch of schools like in an assembly learning, on how kids or adults become active shooters. And maybe being able to speak up and say, hey, that's me, that's my family. This is where I come from. How do I get help?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to be too
Yeah,
existential. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that sounds very similar to when I was a kid, when Mothers Against Drunk Driving would come and do assemblies about drinking and driving and prom time and homecoming and things like that. And those always like stuck out in my head, right? Of like, why are we here? Why are we doing this? Oh my God, look at those pictures and look at all that stuff in those videos that they're showing us. That's really scary and gross and disgusting. Maybe I shouldn't drink and drive, right? But that was more of like that scared campaign where I feel like you could be onto something, Angela. And like, that's when you were talking, that's what it reminded me of like the Mothers Against Drunk Driving used to do.
Yes. Telling people stories to groups and groups of people and letting them know that it's okay to speak up, but then making sure that person is protected from the people that they spoke up against, because that can be hard too.
Yes.
They could be re-victimized.
Right. So in case the listeners want to know, we are not unanimous on this topic. I think we are all sharing helpful ideas and thoughts, and I appreciate the perspectives that my colleagues are sharing today. It's a tricky thing because there's not a really easy set answer. But in our society today, you can find news and media to support whatever belief you have. And so it's harder to find places where you can show up and say, okay, I'm going to listen to someone who has a different perspective, because I'm mostly surrounded by people who believe what I believe and watch media that, believes what I believe. And so I think these are such important conversations to be able to say, okay, I'm hearing what you're saying and I see some validity in that. Now I'm going to have to do something about it. I'm going to have to take some time to think about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because each of you all said something that kind of like clicked with me. And Stephen, you said that, correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned that it's like clients who are malice, like we don't typically go towards that. Is that?
No, yeah, exactly. So it's like, okay, understanding human evil. It's like, oh, you know what the problem, one of the problems of this is? Freaking high school. You know what we're going to do? We're going to get a bunch of horny, pissed off teenagers and throw them in a room together for 8 hours a day. And we're just going to make this social strata system where I'm now thinking how this parallels to society, but it's just like, oh, I know maybe your experience with high school wasn't as bad as mine, but the idea is like, okay, malice. It's like, okay, that level of like anger, aggression, hatred of a place, of a group of people, that was 4 years of my life.
Right.
Absolutely.
Like, we got to understand that like the level of like evil or hatred, it is not, it's an extreme, but it's more ubiquitous than you think. And I think there's this tendency in our profession to just try to avoid it. It's like, okay, no, well, we can talk everything else. We're just going to try to just ascend and reach some level of, high part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And like, no, there's emotional components here that maybe you're missing. And there's a survivorship bias even in this Zoom call. We all have master's degrees. That means initially we all could get through school. We could all be in this, industrial 1 teacher to 40 students kind of situation. That already takes out a lot of people who just can't fit in, are never going to get bachelors, never going to get a master's, and maybe aren't the rule followers we are. So there's all these personality traits that seem to, I don't want to say make us naive or anything like that. I want to say it more like direct us almost away from this in-depth exploration of maybe some parts of human experience that we don't want to acknowledge.
I do think you made a big assumption there that we're all rule followers, Steve.
Yeah, I was like, I wonder
who got through grad school, right? Maybe you don't follow all the rules. Maybe
I
you're just
know.
really good at getting away with it. But
No, I actually am a rule follower because I always get caught. I learned that early in life. I need to follow the rules.
oh yeah, I got caught, and all the other people did not.
Right. Yep.
So I'm curious, Steve, when you say like explore deeper, what does that mean? Does that mean like I often pull Dahmer out because I feel like he's an excellent example, right? Like he asked for help. Dahmer asked for help, according to the Netflix series. I'm not sure in real life, but his mom, she used a lot of prescription medication. Dad, I think he left. Like, what do you mean? Like, do you mean like lean into it? Like lean into as opposed? I mean, because when I hear like needs, like he needed his mom, like he needed his dad. He needed that support. He needed people there. He needed love. He needed whatever it was that he wasn't getting met, and also whatever else led to his behavior. Can you kind of explain a little bit more what you meant by that?
When we talk about violence and aggression specifically, I think there's this tendency to pull away and avoid the topic of our own shadows, the things about ourselves that are capable of evil, of great evil. What's the difference between me and a mass murderer? Not much. You actually look at it. You actually look at the psychology. If you read a history book, any of them, it doesn't matter if it's Nazis, doesn't matter if it's 1917 and we're talking about World War One. Doesn't matter if we're talking about the Armenian genocide. Doesn't matter if we're talking about killing fields, Cambodia, whatever was going on in the 70s. It's like, oh, really, we're not that far from that level of atrocity. And I think that there's I don't want to put this. Exploring your own shadow is a really important thing. Do that. Mm-hmm. But I think there's almost maybe this is me just projecting, but I think there's this general idea in our profession where maybe there's a little bit of a holier than thou thing going on. Like, I could never do that. Like, yeah, you never know.
Yeah, well, we see that in so many areas of society. We have situations where some, exhausted parent who's out of their regular routine takes the child to daycare, but doesn't get to daycare. They go to work because they're not the one who normally drops off the baby. And now they've experienced this horrific experience of their child has died because of their mistake, and people crucify them, and it's like, is that your own fear speaking, that if you can find a reason to judge that parent, then that means that you're going to be okay? Because any one of us could do that. Now, that's not intentional, but that's still, it could be a form of evil if you look at that. It's just, we all have those different sides to ourselves.
I think I work with a lot of veterans and first responders. There's certainly plenty of elements of moral injury being, hey, here's my moral code and I do something outside of it and it really hurts me. I think that it's just, I don't want to put this. It's like, I'm not surprised that there are school shooters. I'm not surprised that there are atrocities, especially with the idea of, like, as you said, Emily, or what are the needs not being met? It seems like there's just a lot of misalignment for a lot of people in society, but there's maybe a difficulty in acknowledging it. I want to say that differently. That's not conveying what I want to say. There's a lot of misalignment with people either against society or in society. And it's hard to connect with that when you are us. And we have our master's degrees and our licenses and we're rule followers, and we're at least aligned with society enough to be successes as we are now.
I think that's interesting that they were talking about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, because like Dateline, 48 Hours, there's a lot of people that watch shows like that about people committing, murder or shooting. So it is interesting. And also when I was going to school, I know I was thinking, well, I just want to, work with people who are anxious and depressed. And, right now I work in a private practice that works with foster children who've been abused and might still be in the foster system or are going through a lot of difficult things in their lives and maybe having done things themselves. So it's interesting that you say that, because I was like, when I'm coming into the field, yeah, I know I'm going to learn about it, but I don't want to go work in a psychiatric ward. I don't want to go work in a jail. And those folks need help too.
Mm-hmm.
We also can't go against our own souls as well. It's like, no.
Yeah.
I would not be good in either of those locations.
That's very true. That's a good
Honest.
point.
Yeah. Yeah. But to your point, Angela, like if you look at most of the dramas on television or streaming services, how many of them are about serial killers or about, these people doing these horrific things, and we're drawn to that. So I agree, Steve. I think these are the shadow parts that we don't want to look at, but we all have them there. And what is the tipping point for somebody to have that shadow part take them over? I think most people want to believe that can't be in them and that could never be them.
Excellent.
And possibly that's true, but you just don't know. I tell people all the time, you can assume how you're going to react in a certain situation, but until you're actually there, you don't really know. You don't,
Agreed. It's
I
very
have clients all the time who tell me, I thought I would react by fighting back or by running. And most of the time, they're like, I ended up freezing. I'm so mad at myself for freezing in this situation because I never thought I would have been in this situation.
Yes. Such a great point. Does anyone have any last thoughts about that conversation?
It sparked more that I want more conversations or have questions.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
Yeah, I like what Steve said. It really made me think about my wheels are still they're going. They're going. So
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
we're gonna do round 2 next week.
Yeah. So I would love to do this again with you all. I'm sure all of us have had some uncomfortable moments, even in this conversation, but I hope that we were able to demonstrate that we listened to each other, we learned from each other, we were respectful about it. No one got heated or left the room, turned off their camera angrily, if you can even do that. And I think another thing that we really need to own, and Steve brought this up in response to a post that I made regarding this whole experience that we had, that people in our field presume we have the same beliefs, and we need to stop doing that. We need to understand that we are not all the same. We're all individuals who are coming into this field, and we have different beliefs. And when we shout from the rooftops a certain belief that's expected to go along with our profession, it shuts people down and it prevents us from having these conversations. And I know I've been guilty of that. I think I was even guilty of that in that conversation we were having at the airport. And so that was something that is definitely a takeaway for me, that I can't presume that a therapist is going to have my same beliefs. I don't have their lived experience. They don't have mine. And just because we have the same training and grad school, credentials and all that, we're still different people. And thank God, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because consumers are becoming so much more savvy about seeking out a therapist who they can relate to, finding someone who's the same race or the same gender or that has some aspect of themselves. This therapist is covered in tattoos. I love that. That's the one I want to work with because I know they're probably going to relate to me in a different way than somebody who's all buttoned up, and those are great things. I think that's a great way that our field is changing, and allowing ourselves to own that is important as well. Well, thank you all. This was really good. As I said to my colleagues before this got started, I wasn't really sure how this was going to go because we all recognized when it happened, it was a pretty amazing thing. And we wanted to share this experience with other people and hopefully encourage other people to have this. So we were just sort of figuring it out as we go along. But I would definitely be down for doing some more conversations where we can learn more about each other. And again, let's do it in a respectful way. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh, no, I'm just putting my hand here. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Raising your hand. Sorry. Okay. So I'm going to get the contact information for the therapists here that are accepting clients. And if you want to reach out to any of these people, colleagues, my colleagues are amazing. We're not the same. We have different perspectives. We have different areas of expertise, but we all have something really good that we want to offer to people, and we want to make a difference in the world. So let me just also throw out there, I'm going to ask my question that I like to ask at the end. Everyone doesn't have to answer, but if you want to share a favorite metaphor, analogy, or catchphrase that you like to use in your work, let's hear it.
Mine is always run towards the fear.
I like that.
That's a good one.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have so many, I can't choose one.
Okay, that's fair enough.
So I'll just choose the most simplest one. I usually say lean into it. Like, let's lean.
Yep, I like that.
I usually try to tell my clients to put themselves first, not like a catchphrase, but just making sure that they take care of themselves first. That's hard for us to quote unquote be selfish, but be selfish and take care of yourself first.
Yeah.
Yourself and others.
Yeah. I use the oxygen mask on the airplane a lot of times when I'm talking, especially to moms who are exhausted and they just can't get the baby to bed earlier because of whatever reason. So they're sleep deprived. I'm like, if you don't put your oxygen mask on first, no one's there to help the baby.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. For me, it's you have survived every worst day you've ever had.
Yes, that's powerful. I love that.
Okay.
Yes.
Tattoo on my forehead.
I apparently have a tattoo on my forehead that says, "Come and talk to me, stranger," in public places.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Oh my goodness. That is so true.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, thank you all for being here. For everyone listening, there are new episodes of the Colleague Down the Hall podcast released every Thursday on all major platforms. Please remember, our work is hard, but it doesn't have to be lonely. Thank you so much for listening to the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. For show notes, links, and downloads, head over to colleaguedownthehall.com, where you'll be able to learn more about getting the clinical support you need and resources to help you work in a supported, sustainable way. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with your therapy friends and colleagues. Subscribe to the podcast, and if you loved this episode, please leave a review.